Hello, am I being heard out there now? I don't know why every time I come on live I have to okay. Can people hear me out there in Chatland? Let me know if you can hear Mr. Trill Black out there in the stratosphere, whatever you call it. Hello T. Right, I'm definitely coming through. Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, lads and ladettes. Am I coming through? There we go. Anyone responding? Thank you. Thank you. I'm seeing the comments coming back. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. TE. We got T in the building. We got Nerd Large in the building. These are familiar names. And we got Jed Kane. Thank you, Jed Kane. Thank you, RJ McKenzie. RJ McKenzie in the chat. Hi, brother Trill Black. I can hear. Thank you. Nerd Large, you are not late. You can never be late to a Trill Black stream. That is firmly established by now. The levels of disorganization are, let's just say, unbelievable. Mr. T says, I need to do a video on the Green Sahara and the DNA of the Taforat Gurans Taboo people. I got a lot to learn. A lot to learn. Those names are foreign to me. Not the taboo. I think I'm vaguely familiar with that. But I would love to. Definitely. Once I get the time to, and I get some of the videos I've got in the backlog here out, then yeah, we can venture further. Darth Skywalker says, I hear. Thank you very much, Darth Skywalker. And I'm just going to set up our subject of interest for tonight, and then we can proceed. I've been keeping an eye on what's been going on generally on YouTube land, and it's all been very good. A lot of stuff's happened relatively recently that's going to be relevant in this video that we're watching tonight. And anyway, I'm not going to spoil anything. You guys will find out as we proceed to watch. So why are we here today? Well, we're here today because we're going to just relive an event from 1996. A debate took place called the Great Debate, and it was involved the individuals, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. We had Dr. John Henrik Clarke involved. We had the great Martin Bernal. We had the not so great, I shouldn't prejudice things, but the not so great Mary Lefkowitz, classical historian, and her friend Guy Rogers was involved in this debate. And the subject wasn't specifically Egypt. It was actually whether or not Martin Bernal and people such as the late great Dr. John Henrik Clarke, whether they were right to assert the preeminence, not just preeminence. What's the word I'm looking for? The prefiguring of Egypt to Greece. In fact, let me even frame that better. The subject of the debate was whether or not Greece took anything, or Greece copied the fundamental essence of its civilization from, from the Egyptians, the Kemetians, the Africans. Now, I'm going to go into this without, I don't want to gild the lily or over-egg the pudding. The debate speaks for itself, but I just wanted to lay just that groundwork. We've got the lady who moderates it. I believe she's still alive. She should still be alive. She should be massively depressed to even hear me say that. Specifically, as she's actually had some problems health problems recently. So she's by any stretch of the imagination, she's not an old woman, but she had some problems a few years back, and I hope she's done well and she's gotten over. I think it was cancer, but that was a lady that moderated it, a great lady by the name of. Let me see if I got that name right. Utrice Lead. Utrice Lead is a Trinidadian and Tobago lady, and light complexion, and you guys will get to see her tonight. But yeah, she moderated the debate, and she injected herself quite a bit to kind of draw out what she needed to draw out. You guys will see that in a minute. But yeah, those are the parties. You got the four interested individuals, and you got two on one side and two on the other. Dr. John Henrik Clarke and Martin Bernal are on the side of course, the Egyptians took almost everything. I'm sorry, the Greeks took almost everything from the Egyptians. You don't have a civilization as great, as widespreading, as powerful, as old as Egypt, and as influential as Egypt, and that civilization not affect the other side, or the other side of the Mediterranean. Greece is literally on the other side of the sea to Egypt, and other places like Rome. So you don't have that kind of grand civilization without it affecting everyone around it. Now, I'm just gonna let this thing play. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna let it play, and then we can all just get moving. Let me know in the chat whether you guys enjoyed the kind of playing around with buttons last week, or if it took away. So let me know. Press 1 if you think it was engaging and enjoyable last week when I had the odd sound effect here and there, and press 2 if you think, nah, we just don't really need it today. We just wanna watch, just wanna chill and let the content speak for itself. Just let me know in the chat. Bit of engagement from you guys if you don't mind. Thank you very much. Let me just set this up. Come on then. There we go. Wanted to know what the discussion was to be. Okay. Just before I go on, I just want to set out some further things. So just a few more things further to what I've already said. Now, Dark Skywalker, thank you for that response. Thank you. That's good to know. I really need that engagement, guys. So let me know if you want more of that cheeky chappy sort of interactive play with sound effects and whatnot. I enjoyed it, but if people say they don't like it, I won't do it at all this live. If it's too distracting, I won't do it at all this live. So 2 for not if you don't want that, and 1 for if you want that. We've already got Darth Skywalker saying that it was cool. Now I need to just lay this out a bit more. Dr. John Henrik Clarke, his chief work that I know of is what's it called? Columbus and the African genocide, I believe it was. 1 second. I think it was something about Columbus and the African genocide. Then you've also got Martin Bernal, whose main work, and that Dr. John Henrik Clarke's book, which I will share with us. Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, right? So at some point in this live, we're gonna just have a quick look at some things that were said in the introduction of that book that are actually quite important. Then you got Martin Bernal. Okay, I've not actually read Dr. John Henrik Clarke's book through and through. I will get to it, but I think it's worth reading, and the little of it that I have read is just a banger. It's brilliant. Martin Bernal came out in the 90s, I believe, with his Black Athena, and that was a disaster for the Egyptology cartel. He was a white professor, very eminent, very very learned and well versed, coming out and saying that, guys, look, the Greeks took fundamentally their civilization from the Egyptians, and just to add a bit more, rub a bit more salt in the wounds, I'm gonna say what everyone else doesn't want to say. They were blacks. The Egyptian civilization, at least the further back in time you go, at its base, at its essence, was a black civilization. It was a place where if you were walking down the streets in ancient Egypt, 2,000 plus years ago, you're in Africa. You're in what I'm going to try and keep it PG, but what the degenerate types, no, sorry, the sophists like to call sub-Sahara. You would think you were in sub-Saharan Africa, okay? That's what Martin Bernal came out and said, and a lot of people, as you can imagine, did not like this. So he got royally attacked for it, and this debate you're about to see was part of that whole, controversy. Okay, there's something that's going to be noted in this debate called Black Athena Revisited. It was basically people coming, a response to Black Athena. Okay, so different academics, which is funny because all the academics that lambasted Black Athena back then, a lot of them are nowhere to be found now, when it's actually been admitted by more and more every day that actually this was a black civilization, and the Greeks, Europeans, got a lot of their civilization, a lot of their knowledge from Egypt. Okay, okie dokie, right. Let's go. Let's go, family. All right, Nerd Large says keep to a minimum. Nice play there. Press 3 if you can. Press 3 if you can hear what's going on the screen, and if you can see very clearly what's going on the screen. Thank you very much. That's all I require of you. Press 3 if you can see what's on the screen and if you can hear it as well. Okay, people are saying the volume is really, really low. Okay, let me just fix that. One sec. Okay. All right. Everyone says they can see, but the volume is really low. All right. Okay, guys, I'm still here. I'm just gonna sort this out. All right, let's try this now. Let's see if this works. So let me know if it's low now. Just let me know again. Give me that feedback. I need that feedback tonight. Thank you, guys.
Make no mistake, this is not a mere difference of opinion in the ivory tower. The battle itself has become an allegory for something as important as the debate itself. Academic insurgents have breached the ramparts of the academy's high priesthood, and the battle is as much for the authority to write history and for how to write history. Our task
Right, can you all see that and hear that clearly now? Can you see that and hear that clearly? Let me know.
tonight is to ferret out the truth insofar as we can discern it, but more importantly, to question and challenge. And we have four incredible people with us tonight, and I'd like to introduce them to you and have them come to the stage as they're introduced. Already on stage is Professor John Henrik Clarke. They were standing for you, Dr. Clarke.
Now it's quite clear that Dr. John Henrik Clarke, I'm just going to pause it here quickly to say this. It's quite clear that Dr. John Henrik Clarke, in this context, at this time, was already well established and a very popular academic. I actually don't know where this is being held, where this debate is being held. But it's very clear that Dr. John Henrik Clarke is already established his his level of brilliance and just his reputation here. So, and she also says they're standing for you. He's not got his eyesight. He had a degenerative eye condition which got worse as time went on, and that's what she's referring to. She's letting him know that people in the audience were actually standing up with the applause for him. So that's what that's about.
Historian, writer, lecturer John Henrik Clarke is a unique resource and a special institution in the African world. Beginning in his early years, Dr. Clarke studied the world history of African people and became a master teacher. He has authored and or edited more than 30 books, short stories, and pamphlets on African and African American history, and is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of African World History in the Department of Africana and Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. Professor John Henrik Clarke. I'd like to ask to the stage Dr. Martin Bernal. Dr. Martin Bernal has been a professor of government at Cornell University since 1972 and an adjunct professor of Near Eastern Studies, also at Cornell since 1986. Educated at King's College, Cambridge, where he earned his doctorate in Chinese Studies in 1966, and at Peking University, the University of California, and Harvard, Dr. Bernal's works have been widely reviewed and criticized, in many instances as controversial. His chief publications are the two-set volume, Black Athena, The Afro-Asiatic Roots of Classical Civilization, and Cadmean Letters, The Westward Diffusion of the Semitic Alphabet Before 1400 BC. Dr. Martin Bernal.
I'm just supposed to say this. Note that, just as I said that, I almost forgot what I was going to say. But yes, so I'm not going to skip this. It's tempting to, but in absence of me doing a detailed introduction about these individuals and going into their credentials, she does that for us. So she's going to give you all their credentials, and you'll see how that's kind of relevant later on going forward.
I invite to the stage Professor Mary Lefkowitz. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Thank you. You can sit right here. Mary Lefkowitz is Andrew Mellon Professor in the Humanities at Wellesley College. She is the author of Not Out of Africa, How Afrocentrism Became an Excuse to Teach Myth as History, and is co-editor of Women's Life in Greece and Rome. With fellow Wesleyan Guy Rogers, she co-edited Black Athena Revisited, a collection of 20 essays by scholars from a broad range of disciplines who take dead aim at Dr. Bernal's Black Athena specifically, but contend generally that the Africa-centeredness of scholarship on the roots of what is called classical civilization is blatant revisionism. Dr. Mary Lefkowitz. I invite to the stage Professor Guy Rogers. Professor Rogers, as I said, is also at Wellesley College, where he is an associate professor of Greek and history. With Dr. Lefkowitz, he co-edited Black Athena Revisited and is author of The Sacred Identity of Ephesus, Foundation Myths of a Roman City. Professor Rogers. So here we have a rather distinguished panel, and I would like them first to begin with their conclusions. They will have about no more than 5 minutes to summarize their major thrust this evening. Professor Clarke, we will start with you.
Single point I wish to get across before we start anything. I am not here to debate with anyone. I have devoted all of my adult life to this subject. I only debate with my equals. All others I teach.
Okay, let's stop. Let's stop right there. So the minute I put this up as a I put the thumbnail up for the live, and I scheduled the live. I think one of the brothers commented and quoted this speech in the comments section below, It is legendary. It's a legendary statement. And if you know anything about this debate, you know of this quote from Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Now, a lot of people might think this is Dr. John Henrik Clarke comes in very what you might consider arrogant. His demeanor is quite confrontational from the very beginning. And some people, you might wonder why. What's the need for that kind of aggro? So when I first watched this, the very first time I watched this, I was kind of a green head on the whole scene of whether Egypt belongs to us, Black Africans, or whether it belongs to the Middle East. I was quite new and green. But one thing, okay, a lot of you might say, I should have known better. I should have known for a fact that ancient Egypt belonged to us and all of that. Yeah, well, I tell you what, the brainwashing is strong. Okay, so I doubt very much that everybody who knows what they know, or on our side of the debate, who knows what they know about ancient Egypt today, always knew it. You know, when I first came to this, I came with what you would call the advantage of how I came to it was that I would say it was an advantage in that you couldn't look at me coming to this debate, coming to this issue, was ancient Egypt a black civilization, and you couldn't say I was biased because I came in myself. I'm talking about Mr. Troll Black now, as you guys dub me, right? I came in complete as neutral as you could be, okay? Apart from the color of my skin and my background and my ethnicity, where I hail from, I was unbiased. I wouldn't say I couldn't care less, but I was open to, well, whatever. If what I've been taught in school is what I've been taught in school, if that's true, then that's fine. And if it's not, then, oh, bloody hell, bloody heck, that's very, very interesting. But other than that, there was no bias. So when I came to cross this video, I was at that stage. I was still learning a lot. Shout out to, I've done it many times, but I'll do it again. I'll never get tired of doing it. Kweli Mika. Kweli Mika came at the tail end of my eye-opening to all of this. Mr. Imhotep as well. So, but I came in and I'm watching this and I'm thinking, oh, this guy's arrogant. He's a bit arrogant. What does he mean? I do not debate, or I only debate my equals, all others I teach. And there's other features in this debate that you will see and you will think to yourself, well, if you've never seen Dr. John Henrik Clarke before, if you've never heard of him, you might think, well, why that? First of all, I'll remind you guys, he's probably really cranky at this stage of his life. He's probably really cranky. He's passed on now. But he's probably really cranky at this stage because his eyesight is, I don't know how long he's had the eye problem for. But he's also sat here having to debate something that, you know what? I don't know. Press 1 in the chat. If you get increasingly frustrating with this debate itself, it's like, we know it's not a debate, but we know when every time you switch on a cartoon for your kids, about Egypt, or a film you want to watch something ancient about the ancient world, a movie, whatever, Hollywood and the powers that be still doggedly, stubbornly rob us of that heritage. So they'll put up straight up white faces. At the very best, they might put up a Middle Eastern face, but they put up these faces that amount to identity theft. They'll put the faces in costumes that are African, and they'll tell us that, there you go, there are your Egyptians. So he's had a long time in his life doing this, debating this, what shouldn't really be debated. Imagine Europeans. Just try and put if you're a European watching, or a Caucasian person watching, and you I don't know, for whatever reason, you actually fall on the side of, it's obvious the Egyptians were black. It's obvious they were an African civilization before the later invasions of the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, the Arabs, before the Ottoman Turks. It's obvious what we know as ancient Egypt was actually black. If you're a European and you fall on that side. Now imagine as a European having to fight all your life and convince people, quote unquote, convince people, because I don't actually think people need to be convinced. I believe once the evidence is shown, the evidence from history, I believe a lot of people are just clutching at straws. They're just clutching. It's only their racism that prevents them from saying, okay, do you know what? You're right. But once, imagine having to convince, like I said, quote unquote, convince people that the Greeks were white, or the Greeks were what you would call part of the Caucasian family, by and large. Imagine having to, let's make it wilder than that. Let's imagine having to convince people that the Gauls, the French Gauls, the Germanic Gauls, were what you would call white people. You have them throwing a couple of black faces here and there in like the Tudor films, and you have complete bedlam. You have for the next month or so, that's content for YouTube, right wing YouTube content makers to say, oh, bloody with his blackwashing, why don't he just stick to black history and all this? That's what you get on the other side. Now imagine having all your life devoted to convincing academia that Egypt is a black space, okay? It's a black place. And also, on top of that, convincing others that, as just having to unbrainwash people. One of his fundamental works, as I've already said, was Columbus and the African Holocaust, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. And if you read that book, he makes some salient points about Columbus. Guys, I think it would not be extreme to say Columbus should be up there with Hitler. We hold Hitler up as, whenever people think of evil, the personification of evil, Columbus should be up there. Columbus massacred, killed on both sides of the Atlantic. Now he's enslaving people. He's enslaving Africans. He's enslaving Africans to go over to the New World to plunder. He's enslaving the indigenous people of the New World, America. And today we have statues of this guy. We have Columbus Day in America. This is part of where this man is coming from. And so he comes to this debate with all that energy, with all that, I can't even believe we're having to debate that the Egyptians were influenced by the Greeks. Why are we having to debate that? If you guys don't have a chip on your shoulder as to all these things, we're only having to debate this, do this level of stupidity, stoop to this level of stupidity because of the stubbornness and the prejudice and the racism of white Western society, for want of a better phrase. And he's coming, and so you might say, oh, this is arrogant, but no, he's coming with that energy, he's coming with that context. So that's when you pile that against, when you put that right next to what I've just said to you, the context I've just given you, Dr. Henrik Clarke's manner actually pales. It pales. It completely disappears into the background. You understand what I'm saying? Let me know if you understand what I'm saying. If what I'm saying makes complete sense. Anyway, I'm just going to press play again, and we're going to go ahead.
Shall we continue or what? I'm not clear. You treat. Broadly speaking.
And sorry, again, that comment when he says all of us I teach, I think you do him a disservice to take it too literally. I think he's thrown that jab across the table at Dr. Mary Lefkowitz and Guy Rogers. That's who he's really talking to. He's coming to this debate saying, you guys, just listen. Just be taught. Just put your arrogance to one side and be taught. That's really who he's aiming that at. That's the context of what's going on. Sorry, I won't interrupt for the next 5 minutes, at least.
speaking, the book, Not Out of Africa, a good sophomore effort, is not really about Not Out of Africa. Last year, it was the bell curve. This year, it's not out of Africa. Next year, it'll be something else. This is part of a world war against the role of African people in the history of the world. If we began history, began mankind, how is it that the last branch of the human race to enter that arena, marked civilization,
Ooh.
now think they brought civilization?
Oh my goodness.
Now, it is part of a war over and above Professor Lefkowitz's book and over and above her political naivete. Her naivete is about what is happening in the Western world. There was a recent book called The Tribes. It diagrammed every people, major people on the earth, searching for a piece of turf for themselves. It left out the African people because the other people, including Asian imperialists, have plans to take over Africa. There have been several articles in the New York Times advocating the recolonization of Africa. This book and other literature of this nature mean to prepare the world to accept a rationalization for the re-enslavement of Africa. Now,
Okay, I lied. 5 minutes have not gone by and I need to interject here. This is important and you will thank me for making this point. You see how many claps that comment got here? In fact, we won't need, the debate's been settled. Our little debate has been settled, okay? Our little debate's been settled there. We will not have any need for sound effects or clips or sound clips or whatever. We won't need it because this is a banger enough in itself. What this man's speaking is enough. There's enough explosions and you can make your own sound effects. That got very few claps, chat. It got very few claps there, but I think it got very few claps, not because the audience are ignorant, but because, I don't know who's in the audience, but I think people back in 1996 when this debate came out might have thought what Dr. John Henrik Clarke said there, it's gone over their heads because they might have thought, you're kind of, that's a bit of oration, or you're just kind of playing to the gallery there. Nobody's going to reinvade or recolonize Africa. What did we just hear couple of weeks ago? Was it a couple of weeks ago or about 3-4 weeks ago? 3-4 weeks ago, a guy came out. He used to work for a white individual, an American guy. Used to work for one of these big, he still works for one of the big security firms, freelance guy. He used to be in the US military, I think, CIA, okay? And this guy came out and he brazenly said in an interview, we need to recolonize Africa because they can't do it themselves. We keep getting all these immigrants come from, all these false narratives, all these stupid false narratives that the West and pretty much, I love how conservative and right-wing sort of media likes to portray this view that they're put upon and they're a dying breed. You go on YouTube, what millions and millions of views these videos collect. Oh, Africa was really responsible for slavery. I think that video is like almost 2 million, if not past 2 million now. How Africa is really Africa can only has itself to blame for slavery and all this, and they need to get reparations from themselves. You got all these videos hitting 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. Obviously, the propaganda is getting out there to someone. Some people are eating it up. That we can't look after ourselves. That we are a burden on the world. That we're the last in terms of civilization. Obviously, it's getting out there. But when Dr. John Henrik Clarke said this, a lot of people might have been under the deception that actually things are a bit better now. Things are a bit better, and the West doesn't really have any beef with Africa. It wishes us well, and we are our own worst enemies. We can't really. Right now, we're kind of working out democracy. Too many dictators in Africa, and then you look at African Americans too. Maybe the state of the world then kind of fed into people thinking, do you know what? That's a bit too much, Dr. Clarke. But boy, oh boy, were people wrong. He's talking about something. He's a prophet right now in that statement. He's talking about something that is playing out right now. Right now, they are actually talking brazenly about recolonizing Africa because, the argument is we can't do it ourselves when they need to come in like a big daddy and help us. This man said this, 18 years ago? 18 years ago. Flew over the audience's head completely. Now, he also said, prior to this, he mentioned the bell curve. Thank you. Someone in the chat mentioned the bell curve. He said 1994, came out in 1994. That's Nerd Large. And Nerd Large, thank you for that comment. Nerd Large says, I remember it being all over the news as a child. And the bell curve was, I'll simplify it. Blacks are stupid. African-American blacks are stupid. Look at this curve. It obviously shows this. Look at this statistical collection of data. And it obviously shows that Black Americans are lesser intelligent. Therefore, you fill it in what they want to do with African-Americans because of that. Never mind the hundreds of years. And this is something I actually... let me finish that train of thought. Never mind the hundreds of years of subjugation. Never mind the hundreds of years. Literally, we're within decades away from a time when African Americans couldn't go to whatever university they wanted, couldn't go to school with whites, couldn't drink from the same fountain. We're within decades from it. And people are still out here saying we need to stop talking about racism. It's past. Let's just move on. Well, we would have long gotten over racism. Like, in my mother's lifetime, we had places in America, places in this world, in South Africa, on our own continent, where we couldn't go here and there because this was reserved for white folks. That the South Africa situation ended in the early 1990s. That's how recent it is. And we're supposed to just so I don't know if you guys remember Beach Blonde built what's it? Someone help me in the chat. Beach Blonde Bad whatever. Do you remember that? The congresswoman saying what she wanted to say, calling a black lady in Congress saying you got fake eyelashes. Say you got fake eyelashes, and because you got fake eyelashes, shut your mouth. And the minute the black congresswoman decided to, in a very savvy way, get her own back, and call this what's her name now? I can't remember the white congress. I can't remember either of their names. And she spoke back. That was when the Speaker of the House of Representatives decided to take action and started saying things like, "We need to calm it down, ladies." It's like, you can disrespect our culture, you can disrespect our history for however long you want. Beach Blonde Bad built body. Thank you, Mr. Nancy. The minute we start to say, right, enough, we're going to be militant about this, we're not going to take any more, that's when the Speaker of the House, that's when we all need to start getting along. That's when we all need to start behaving and being great and being civilized to each other. Let's just ignore everything else, Anyway. So what he's saying here is very, very important. That's all I'm going to say now. Back to the video.
With the black endorsers of the book, running dogs of the new imperialism, professional white behind kissers, and as Carlos Cook used to say, a disgrace to the skin they wear. These people, if I'm be so kind to call them that, are running from themselves and teaching us a lesson that we should have learned long ago. Sometimes white wannabes are more dangerous than whites. And sometimes they'll fight you harder to be accepted by whites. They are running from their own people and running from definition. Now, what we need to look at now is how Professor Lefkowitz neglected the white writers through history, the radical European writers who wrote positively of Africa and who identified the relationship of Africa to the ancient Greeks. Now, if given time, and I probably won't be given it this evening, I can prove to you with your satisfaction, if you are listening, that Rome and Greece was not European creations. These were Mediterranean-inspired nations and couldn't be created by Europe because at the time there was no Europe. Huh? Huh? All right. I take it?
The book is Not Out of Africa. It's by Mary Lefkowitz, and it's a book that says basically nothing. Not all this stuff from these academics talking about. You got George R. James writing about stolen legacy, how the Greeks stole. So Martin Bernal is coming late to the game here. There's already been knowledgeable black individuals who have come out and said the Greeks got their civilization fundamentally from the Africans, the Egyptians. Okay? So it's not new. It's not new to anybody. But Mary Lefkowitz takes it on herself to write a book as inflammatory as Not Out of Africa, saying that it's all rubbish. Africa is sub-Saharan and it's got nothing to do with the Greeks. It's got nothing to do with this, that, and the other. That's what he's referring to when he talks about Not Out of Africa. Mary Lefkowitz, incendiary book.
Let me just begin by saying what my book, Not Out of Africa, isn't about. It's not an attack on Afrocentrism. If Afrocentrism means recognition of African achievements in the world, it doesn't seek to deprive Africans of their rightful heritage. Africans do not need Greece to have a cultural heritage. They have a rich cultural heritage. Egypt is just one part of it. They don't need Greece. I'm concerned because what is being offered in some quarters as African history is really a European myth. And thus, instead of getting real information about Africa, what people are learning is something that's really 18th century French. It's Eurocentric, it's based on Greek and Roman myths. I do not myself think that one should do that because Egypt itself is so fascinating, so rich. There is so much that you can learn and know, and that I myself, as a result of all this work that we have been doing for the last 4 years and more, have come to know and understand about Egypt. I would like to now spend a great deal of the rest of the time that I have learning about that, because it is so different. It's so different from what the Greeks thought that it was. Herodotus was very impressed by Egypt. He wanted to say that everything in Greece that he could think of came or had some connection with Egypt. He didn't really understand the depth and richness of Egypt, which went in directions way beyond what he knew from his own experience in Greece. So I am concerned about that in Not Out of Africa. I've tried to explain why the notion of an Egyptian mystery system, which is basically a French invention, it's based on a novel that everyone has forgotten about, but still you can find in some very obscure libraries, get it up in Boston even, and that book, which was by a French priest, is based on Greek and Roman sources and tries to describe a Greco-Roman Egypt and that this myth was preserved in Freemasonry and thus came into American culture. So I'm concerned that that myth not be taught, the notion that there was an Egyptian mystery system. Instead, I'd like to see people learn, all people learn, not just black people, white people, any people learn about Africa and the civilizations therein. And Egypt is particularly appealing because it's so old, it's so impressive, its role in the Mediterranean was so vast, and so many other civilizations were touched by it. Even if only slightly, they did get touched by it, and we have to work on that. I would like to say, just in my last 2 minutes, that from my point of view and the point of view of my colleague Guy Rogers, the ancient world is multicultural, and that one cannot study any one bit of it without studying every other bit of it. And the debate tonight, and I hope the debate will go on for many, many years because so many of us will learn from it, that debate should investigate the degree and extent of those links. Myself, as I think you know, I don't think the Greek philosophy was stolen from Egypt. I do not believe there is any evidence to show that. I think that because Egyptian philosophy, and there is such a thing as Egyptian philosophy and deep Egyptian religious thought, which is very, very complicated, and I myself need to know more about it still. But it's not like the Greeks. It may in many ways be richer and better than some of the concept.
I would like Professor Bernal to conclude.
Let's just recap what she said. She said that Herodotus didn't quite understand the grand depth of Egypt, and so therefore, when he writes in his histories about the impressiveness of Egypt and how it's greatly a lot of what the Greeks know and do, which he did say, a lot of their science and a lot of their religion and a lot of their civilization comes from the Egyptians. When Herodotus says that, he didn't really understand. Again, they do this time and time again. You will hear, if you spend any length of time in this field, in this place, okay, where you will find what they do is, on the one hand, they will big up in a different context. They will big up these philosophers, Pythagoras, Thales, Hippocrates, Aristotle, Plato. They'll big them up. But when they say things that they do not quite like, that embarrasses them in the historical record, then all of a sudden, they didn't know what they were talking about. So, so this again, as you carry on this debate, this point is made very briefly, but it's made nonetheless by, I think, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Which is it? You know, you can't possibly say they had this great scientific civilization and whatnot, and this mathematical civilization, but for some reason you can't trust them with history. You can't trust them with giving an account of their own culture and of their own civilization, because it's not just Herodotus who says, who we can go into the historical record and find saying, as Greeks, we got pretty much everything from the Egyptians, from those Africans, from those black Africans, those people who they constantly refer to as black, melancroes, melanas. When the Latin age comes, nigrum, nigra, atar, furvus. Terms that denote black, again and again and again. They're constantly looking for words that can describe how black the Egyptians are in comparison to them. And again, we did this last week in our last live. They're not people who are white themselves. They're very tan. We're talking about a part of the world that they're coming from that is very tan themselves. But they're constantly using words to describe how black this part of the world is. Egypt, Ethiopia, all in the same terms, okay? So this is something they do again and again and again, and it's not new. It's not new. The Greeks are great. until they start telling us things like, oh, we owe our civilization to Africans, we owe our civilizations to those black Egyptians. Then we start, then it becomes a, we can't really trust the auditors. I'm not really sure. This is the height of duplicity. Absolute lies. I cannot come up with enough words for it. It is, without swearing, without cussing, and this is perfidy, mendacity on a level that you cannot begin to understand. This is how sick these people are. I'll go on.
I agree with Professor Lefkowitz.
And by these people, for those who want to twist my words, I'm not talking about white folk. Again, I'm talking about this class of people, and which by and large do hail from the Caucasian diaspora, who maintain the lies that Africans, very often patronizingly, or Africans, didn't really go out of Africa, didn't really achieve anything past their forest civilizations and whatnot. That class of people is who I'm talking about. Don't twist my words and say I'm reverse racism. Is the sound?
And it is very interesting to note that European culture did not begin in Germany or Sweden, but at the extreme southeast corner of Europe, and the reason for that is quite straightforward. It was the closest area to the great civilizations of northeastern Africa and southwest Asia, and this East Mediterranean complex was the source of Greek and hence, I believe, European culture. Now, that's not to deny that there was a great deal of local development within Greece, and I certainly do not propose that Greek culture was merely a projection or an imitation of Egyptian or Semitic culture. It's clearly a very distinctive culture, but to try and understand Greek culture without knowing the background of the ancient cultures behind it would be as absurd as it would be to study Japanese culture without knowing the Chinese and Korean roots behind it, and no East Asian specialist would dream of doing that. That you have to see the cultures as interrelated, and that the older cultures and the more elaborate cultures had the predominant cultural influence. One of our basic disagreements is that Mary Lefkowitz, sitting in the 20th century, feels that she knows better than the Greek historians of the 5th and 4th, 3rd century, when they said that there were significant influences. Yes, he was very impressed. Yes, he was very Greek. But what struck him were specific similarities. And Herodotus, a rather plodding historian, he said, well, what's the reason for these similarities? I think they're too close for coincidence. I don't think the Egyptians could have borrowed them from the Greeks because they've had them so long. Therefore, the most likely explanation is that the Greeks took them from the Egyptians. And this is what I call the ancient model. And this model was not overthrown.
Okay, people are telling me it's too low. I'm gonna go back. Sorry to do this. I'm gonna quickly go back. I've had more than one person say it was too low with Mr. Bernal, Dr. Bernal on. So let me just go back slightly because he has some salient points to make. Again, apologies for this. Okay. Just seek that. Okay, I'll turn it up a bit now. Let's go.
Sweden, but at the extreme southeast corner of Europe, and the reason for that is quite straightforward. It was the closest area to the great civilizations of northeastern Africa and southwest Asia. And this East Mediterranean complex was the source of Greek and hence, I believe, European culture. Now, that's not to deny that there was a great deal of local development within Greece, and I certainly do not propose that Greek culture was merely a projection or an imitation of Egyptian or Semitic culture. It's clearly a very distinctive culture, but to try and understand Greek culture without knowing the background of the ancient cultures behind it would be as absurd as it would be to study Japanese culture without knowing the Chinese and Korean roots behind it, and no East Asian specialist would dream of doing that. That you have to see the cultures as interrelated, and that the older cultures and the more elaborate cultures had the predominant cultural influence. One of our basic disagreements is that Mary Lefkowitz, sitting in the 20th century, feels that she knows better than the Greek historians of the 5th and 4th, 3rd century, when they said that there were significant influences. Yes, he was very impressed. Yes, he was very Greek. But what struck him were specific similarities. And Herodotus, a rather plodding historian, he said, well, what's the reason for these similarities? I think they're too close for coincidence. I don't think the Egyptians could have borrowed them from the Greeks because they've had them so long. Therefore, the most likely explanation is that the Greeks took them from the Egyptians. And this is what I call the ancient model. And this model was not overthrown until the early 19th century. Now, Mary Lefkowitz mentions the 18th century novels, and at times, despite the attention she's devoted to dismissing my book, I sometimes feel she hasn't read it, because I do devote quite a few pages to the novel Setos, which she talks, and I too have read it. It had to be sent by interlibrary loan to me, and I do think it is important in the formation of Masonic thought. But what she does not bring forward is the fact that this was perfectly orthodox history as understood in the 18th century, and going back beyond the 18th century to the view that the Greeks and Romans had of the Egyptian sources of their own culture. Now, I think that the Greeks were, on the whole, a very intelligent people, and I respect their philosophy, their art, their democracy, their science, but I also respect their history, and this is a great anomaly in Mary Lefkowitz's approach, in that she says they're very good in these other respects, but they cannot be trusted with their own history. So that I want to bring that out, that one has... Now, she says that modern classics has dismissed all this, and it's true that the predominant view of modern classicists is that the debts to Egypt and Phoenicia, and I don't want to underestimate the importance of Levantine or Southwest Asian influences on Greece, that these influences were exaggerated by the Greeks, and I think that they clearly were I think they were properly developed, and to some extent the Greeks may even have played down because they were very conscious of being Greek and proud as being Greeks, and they were affected by two forces. On the one hand, they wanted to plug in to the ancient civilizations and give themselves cultural depth. On the other hand, they were very conscious of being Greeks and wanted not to be surpassed culturally by the Egyptians and Phoenicians, who were still very much around. So they had two forces working on them. Modern scholars working in an intensely racist 19th and 20th century had no double force. They had the single force wanting to make Greece pure, white, and European, and the ideological pressure that put on the scholars led to what I see as the recent dismissal of Egyptian and Phoenician influences on ancient Greece.
Right. So one thing that I'm stopping the video to make a point about, I think I'm doing a good job letting it play long enough before I interject. Okay. Right. One thing I'll say is he says something important there. He says that he talks about likelihoods. So the man speaking says the likelihood, based on what he's read, based on what he's researched, is that these people were heavily influenced by a culture and a civilization as huge, as gigantic as Egypt. It's almost impossible to think otherwise. Not just influenced, where let's look at it this way. Greece to Rome, there is no denying that the Romans took a lot. It would be like saying what Mary Lefkowitz is doing is like saying the Romans were completely isolated from the Greeks. They came up with all their gods, anything about Roman history, Roman civilization is literally copy and paste from the Greeks. What people don't know, what people know a bit less is that the same goes when you're talking about Greece to Egypt. Now, he says, in the likelihood of things, you cannot look at the historical record, the archaeological record, and not conclude that the Greeks got their civilization from the Egyptians. You just can't, barring language, barring the way their actual speech. But even their speech, a lot of their words came from the Egyptians. Okay? So, but I want to hone in on that word likelihood. See, why I want to hone in on that is because, this actually has relevance for a video that is coming out hopefully this week on this channel. I'm taking a quick detour from our series on Black inventions, because this one is very important, and you'll see why it's very important for the times we're in, for what's going on, especially what's going on right now in on this side of the Atlantic. Okay, so this point I'm making is important, so keep your eye out, family, for the video that's coming out this week. I'm not going to give anything away. Keep your eyes peeled on this channel. It's a big banger coming out, a big explosive one coming out this week. Okay, but all of a sudden, when it comes to African history, if you watch my video on Ge'ez and the African scripts and the Sabaean texts, when it comes to Africa's influence on the rest of the world, going back into antiquity, the standards for linking dots and so linking dots and drawing conclusions about this and that, the standard all of a sudden gets taken up stratospheric. It becomes, you have to do this, you have to cross this T, you haven't really proved this, you haven't really proved that. Nowhere else is that the case when we're talking about what would be the word, historiology, for let's just make up word. Nowhere else is that a standard. But when it comes to Africa's influence on the rest of the world, when you go back into, I'm talking Black Africa now, not the newcomers, sorry to say, but not the Turkic extraction up north in modern Africa today. Not those. Okay, when we're talking about real African influence on the rest of the world, all of a sudden the standard is, well, we're not quite sure. We need to be certain of this and we need to be certain of that. Everywhere else, you look at history, everywhere else, historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, social historians, they're always joining up dots and coming up with conclusions that seem reasonable to make. But when it comes to Africans and our role on a global scale, then all of a sudden, you can't jump to conclusions there. Mind what you're saying. That's what he's talking about. He's saying you look at the text, you look at what we can dig up, you look at everything, and it's a no-brainer. Unless you're Mary Lefkowitz and whatever the other guy's name is, Guy Rogers. Anyway, back to the video. That's all.
Professor Rogers, please do present your conclusion in 5 minutes or less.
I'd just like to say from the beginning that Professor Lefkowitz and I are here precisely because we're open to debate about these issues.
I don't want to prejudice anyone's opinion before this guy starts speaking, but I'll do it anyway. You can tell this guy's on one. You can tell this guy is... I've paused it at a very unfortunate period. But yeah, just look at him. You can tell... Okay, whatever. I'll let his words speak for themselves.
The University of North Carolina Press asked Professor Lefkowitz and me to put together a volume of responses to some of the questions which are either implicitly or explicitly raised by Professor Bernal in his work, Black Athena. And what I would like to do for just a couple of minutes here, and perhaps expand upon this a little bit later, is to set out some of those questions and to give you some sort of sense of what the preliminary answers to the questions that the contributors to our volume found. Obviously, among the important...
That brother came up to slap him. He changed his mind last minute. Last minute, he changed his mind and he just fixed up the microphone. But I bet you, this brother right now, the brother that came and fixed the microphone, his intention was to open a can of whoop something. But he just last minute, he thought, let me fix that microphone for you.
that people have been concerned with. Number one, were the ancient Egyptians black? 2, did the ancient Egyptians or the Hyksos colonize Greece? 3, did the ancient Egyptians or the Phoenicians massively influence the early Greeks in the areas of language, religion, science, or philosophy? 4, did 18th and 19th century scholars obscure the Afro-Asiatic roots of classical civilization for reasons of racism and anti-Semitism? Let me give you some sense of our conclusions. Number 1, the scholars who have looked carefully at the first question have concluded that the attempt to fit the ancient Egyptians into a modernizing category of either black or white do so from a perspective which lacks both historical and biological justification. Did the ancient Egyptians...
I missed that. I'm just going to go back slightly.
...or white do so from a perspective which lacks both historical and biological justification? Did the ancient Egyptians or the Hyksos colonize what would later become Greek lands in the 2nd millennium? Unambiguous archaeological evidence to that effect is lacking in the Mediterranean. Did the ancient Egyptians and the Phoenicians massively influence the Greeks in the areas that I outlined? There is no doubt, and no one has denied for at least 50 years that I know of, that there was Egyptian influence on early Greek culture in several different areas. In areas, actually, that curiously Professor Bernal skips over, like art and architecture. The real scholarly question is, can that influence be described as massive in the sense that Professor Bernal means? And the conclusion which scholars from many different subdisciplines, and not just classicists, but Egyptologists, Semiticists, and African historians have reached, is that the case cannot be made for a massive influence. Furthermore, students of the ancient world propose a very different model of interaction among the cultures of the ancient world in the time period that we're discussing. Instead of seeing a one-way street leading from Egypt to Greece, scholars now are shaping a model which includes many two-lane highways going from Egypt to Greece, going from Egypt to the Near East to West Asia, and back in the other direction as well. What about racism and anti-Semitism in 18th and 19th century historiography? Yes, there were some scholars who operated from a framework which we would consider to be both racist and anti-Semitic. but an undifferentiated picture of racism and anti-Semitism cannot be sustained on the basis of the evidence.
This is exactly right. Pause. This is exactly what the famed Meta something said. This is exactly what he did with his video. He used a load of semantics and he dragged out his videos just to say nothing. This man has said nothing. What the most that you can sum what he said up to mean is, no, I disagree. The Greeks got nothing from the Egyptians. On the one side of his mouth, he says, yes, there was some early influence, but can you call that massive? Well, if let's even take that alone. If there was early influence, and if he goes on to point as he did just now, if he pointed out that actually you even missed out some things, art and architecture in your Black Athena, as to how the Egyptians influenced the Greeks, then how can you not go on to class that as massive? If even you're pointing out that, oh, in your big tome, I think the Black Athena is in several volumes and is a body of work. If even Guy Rogers is having to say you missed out this and that and this here and that, how can you then go on to say, but I beg to differ, it wasn't a massive influence? How? So you've used all that time to talk out of both sides of your mouth in a very fork-tongued manner. It will be seen later on in this debate that's complete rubbish from the mouths of the Greeks themselves, not just the one everyone likes to quote, Herodotus. They told us themselves that they got a lot of their things from Egypt. Now, you will see, going on further on in this video, you'll see how they try to explain that away. How Dr. Mary Lefkowitz and Guy Rogers, how they explain that away. Now, somebody in the chat, I am keeping one eye on the chat. Somebody in the chat earlier on said, and I love the interaction from the chat, so please keep that up, guys. I really like that. I really like seeing your comments, so keep the interaction going there. And if you should feel so inclined, drop us a super chat as well, okay? So, right, as you will see further on in this, these guys sort of, they have their excuses ready as to how to explain away the fact that the ancient Greeks themselves said the Egyptians gave them everything. Okay, they have their excuses ready. But someone in the chat earlier on said that what was it now? What was I was going to say? Someone in the chat earlier on said that what was it? What was it they said? Lefkowitz later walked back some of the stuff she said, and she did. Now, I've heard that she did, but I don't know specifically what she'd walked back, so that's something for me to look into later on. But that's interesting. That's interesting that she did that, but till now, I'm willing to bet that what when she's quoted by the people opposing the idea of an African Egypt, of an African ancient Egypt, when people quote her work, they're not quoting the times when she's revised her opinions. They're quoting her from the era when she was saying what she was saying in this video. So it's like it leaves a bitter taste in the mouth. It's bittersweet to say that someone walked back what they said all those years ago. And why have they walked it back? Has the walking back, another question is, has the walking back of all this stuff that you see in the video here, has that been as emphatic? Has that been as pronounced as what you said to denigrate the research of people like Martin Bernal? Again, I take you back to Metatron's video, his most recent video when he addressed the issue with Quelimika. It was a case of yeah, walking back some things, but not really walking them back. You know? Right. Back. I'm just going to go back to the video now.
The conclusions, and we'll get to the amplification of the conclusions as we go on in the evening. But I wanted first to ask each of the discussants tonight how they came to this particular area of study and how scholastically have they undertaken comparative analysis in this particular area of study. How, in effect, are you preparing, or have you prepared yourself? We'll start at this end of the table and go straight down. Yes?
I'm not sure I quite understand what you're asking. Are you asking how we, or what our scholarly preparation was? Both. Okay.
And as much as you exert influence,
Yes.
by virtue of your scholarship in this area, I'm asking, how do you defend your scholarship in this area? How did you acquire your scholarship in this area?
Okay. In a way, I am, I think, an example of the kind of training that Professor Bernal has been calling for, because I have the advantage of not having an undergraduate degree in classics, but an undergraduate degree in ancient history, which included, where I was taught, not only Greece and Rome, but also Egypt and Persia and Phoenicia and Palestine. So that's my preparation. How do I defend my scholarship? I don't have to defend all of the different areas which are raised by Black Athena or issues that we're talking about. The whole point of putting together a collected volume with scholarly views by different people is to offer different perspectives on these questions. My own particular expertise happens to be in the eastern part of the Mediterranean from about 1200 BCE to 300 CE.
So are you saying that you were a facilitator of a frontal assault?
A frontal assault on what?
As opposed to, in this book, Black Athena Revisited. If you're saying that you're not yourself prepared to defend the scholarship in this book.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm certainly prepared to defend the scholarship in this book, but I don't claim, and I don't think that anyone else would claim to be an expert in the 27 different fields which Professor Bernal raises. In that sense, we're all students of the...
If you pardon me, Professor Bernal will defend his own work. I'm saying that you, as a co-editor of this book, I would have assumed, perhaps it's naivety on my part, that part of your role is also to inspect the scholarship of contributors to your book, as well as to exercise some kind of scholastic judgment as to their expertise on the subject.
I think your question is now a little bit clearer, and my answer to it is that I stand completely behind our conclusions, and I take full responsibility for them. Is that clear enough?
Well, I was under the impression I was saying what I had to say quite well. Okay. You evidently are having difficulty trying to understand, and that's an entirely different problem, one which I'm happy to say belongs almost singularly to you. Professor Lefkowitz, how did you come by your scholarship in this area, and how do you defend your scholarship in this area?
Well, I come by...
She came ready. I can't let that pass. She came ready for the ish. She came ready for the ish.
My scholarship in this area as a classical scholar, I have an undergraduate degree in classics and a PhD in classics. My work has been widely through the whole field of Greece and Rome. I became particularly interested in a neglected field. It was neglected entirely when I came to it, which was the study of women in the ancient world. Half of the women in Greece and Rome, and I think elsewhere in the ancient world as well, were simply, half the people were ignored. So I became very interested in that and spent a lot of time on that, which involves many different periods of antiquity. I got interested in this subject because I was asked to write a review for the New Republic magazine of Martin Bernal's 2 volumes, and at the same time I was asked to consider such influential and important books as George G.M. James's Stolen Legacy. So that's how I got into this. My perspective is simply that of a person who seeks to understand history and who uses evidence. I defend myself by citing my sources and the materials. Anyone can check these references. My goal is not to stifle discussion or to do anything I do not seek to indoctrinate. I have no agenda, even though many may be imputed to me. I have none. You may say that, but how do you know what is in my mind? If I am a white person or a Jewish person, does that mean that someone has told me what to say or told me what to think?
Professor Lefkowitz, have you been...
I think it was actually revealed as this debate goes further on. I think she just the New Republic. Thank you, Mr. Nancy says. By the way, the New Republic is a right-wing publication. It was I think you might be touching on what I'm touching on right now. It was actually revealed later on in this that actually she was funded by some major right-wing organizations in her efforts to debunk Martin Bernal. So she claims to be completely unbiased. Turned out to be not true.
No, I have not been to Africa. Have you?
Have you studied in Africa?
No, I have not studied.
She says, if you might have missed that because the volume went down for whatever reason, just now. But the host, the moderator, asked her whether she had been to Africa. She said no. Well, that's quite important. I mean, you're holding yourself out as an expert on African, not so much an expert. Okay, let's be fair to her. She's holding herself out as somebody with enough authority to dispute somebody's take on whether African history on Africans have influenced European civilization. Okay, Egypt is firmly within Africa. The ancient Egyptian civilization originated in Africa from black Africans, from indigenous Africans, and in all her time, I don't know, she looks about 60 plus here, she's never set foot on the African continent. Because that's important. If you actually step foot on the African continent, I can't tell you the amount of times I've seen people go to Africa, specifically Egypt, and say, "Oh my goodness, why don't we see this side of Egypt?" Like, you go down into Egypt, not on the edge of the Mediterranean there, and you will see just how black that place still is till today. Go to the Aswan region. People are always writing home, always doing YouTube videos and writing about how black the place is compared to what they were led to believe. Now, that might change your perspective when you start writing about a place and a culture and downplaying the Africanness of that region, and also downplaying the downplaying the reaches of that culture. It's just odd. It might seem like a trite point to make, or like a petty, cheap point to make, but it matters. It matters that somebody debating African history has never set foot on the continent, and this is your job. You're not a dilettante. You're not a armchair general. This is your work. You're a classical historian. Right? That's what she bills herself as, a classical historian who's never set foot in Kemet. It's a bit weird.
I never said I did.
Can you tell me the African scholars to whom you have referred in your scholarship?
I have referred to the writings that are in Black Athena Revisited by some distinguished Egyptologists, such as John Baines and David O'Connor and Frank Yerko, I can only refer to those in detail. I have read many other things, but I do not pretend at any time to be a scholar of Africa and Egypt. I must rely on others for that, including Martin Bernal, whose work I, in spite of his suggestion, I read, and I know I could find the pages very easily on Terrasson that he mentions. And it is an example of the comprehensiveness of his work that he knows this obscure source.
In writing as prolifically as you have on ancient Greece, have you been to Greece?
Yes, many times.
I thought so. I would like to ask the same question of Professor Bernal.
Well, my training was not in this area at all. It was in East Asia, Chinese, Japanese, and to some extent Vietnamese. And the one advantage of learning Chinese, in particular the Chinese writing system, is that it makes you somewhat less frightened of others. I had done a very little Greek at school, and I tried to teach myself more as I did Hebrew. But essentially, over the last 20 years, I have been an autodidact, that is, teaching myself, but in a very privileged situation, in that I was a teacher at a university, so I could go to the experts, ask them naive questions about the new subject that I was looking at, and they were extraordinarily generous in responding to me, so that I did get information in this way. I was also given a very broad historical background by my father, who read me H.G. Wells's Outline of History over 6 years with various glosses, so that he gave me a sense that one could understand history, one could see things in larger contexts and sometimes even in global contexts, and that I found very useful and confidence building. But I always insisted, and I say this in the introduction to Volume 1, that I am trying to open doors for people who have more or are better equipped in a specialized sense to go through, because there are many areas that I look at and touch on but cannot follow through. So I wouldn't claim a deep expertise. Yes, I have been to Greece. Yes, I have been not only to Egypt, but to Tunisia, to Malawi, to Zambia, to Zimbabwe. So I have some experience of Africa. So I have that background, and I think that has helped me in my general approach.
In your book, your 2 volumes, Professor Bernal, the Black Athena volumes, are you suggesting that you initiated much of this information, or are you picking up from where others have left off?
Well, I mean, I start off looking at the ancient sources, the ancient Greek sources, their view of their own history, but I don't take them on face value. I then try to check, looking at archaeological, linguistic, cultic information from other sources. So I was using a multidisciplinary approach, and I am eclectic, and I've been accused of that. But I think in these areas where there's so little information that one cannot follow the rigor of pursuing one particular discipline, like linguistics or something like that. One has to look across the board.
I was referring specifically to the scholarship of African scholars.
Yes, I mean, although I must confess that I came to them rather late on in my study, and to some extent I found that I had reinvented the wheel, that there was a great deal of what I had laboriously tried to assemble for myself had been assembled, and this was very striking in the case of scholars like Du Bois or St. Clair Drake, but also many of Sheikh Anta Diop and others provided extraordinarily useful avenues for me to pursue. I wouldn't.
She's making him bow the knee here. I mean, I like this lady. Like I said, when I first watched this, I was under the impression that she was a bit too engaged, a bit too biased. But again, well, look at her. You know, you don't have to guess what side she would fall on this debate if she was if she was on the table herself. But I think it's called for. It is called for to say to Dr. Martin Bernal, there have been people who have gone before you in this field who have been saying exactly what you have said, and it's something that sticks in the craw when nobody listens, when black academics are saying this because supposedly we're biased, or just let's be honest about it, we're not supposed to be listened to. We don't know what we're talking about. That's really what's going on. But the minute a white face gets up, or someone of a Caucasian extraction gets up and has the letters from on the back of their names, and they say what we've been saying for however long we've been saying it, that's when the world pays attention. So there is something. I'm glad she did that. What she's doing is making a point that, look, you've not come to this as this conclusions that you make in Black Athena about the influence of the Black Egyptians and the influence of Black Egypt on the world. You've not come to this in isolation. There have been people who've come before you. You are standing on the shoulders of some greats here, are you not? And you might say she's ham-fisted with it, but I don't think she is at all. I think she does it quite well considering. Yeah? That's her point.
Afrocentrist, except to the extent that I believe that Africans and peoples of African descent have played many significant roles in world history, and that these have been systematically denied by European and North American scholars in the 19th and 20th century. I think that the degree of racism in our society can hardly be overestimated. We all have it, and it's very, very difficult to see past it.
All right, thank you very much. Professor Clarke.
I came to this subject before I was 10 as a Baptist Sunday school teacher. I wanted to teach junior class in Sunday school, so I learned to read very early. What baffled me from the beginning was the Bible itself. I could not find my people in a book that's supposed to be about all mankind. And what called my attention to the neglect of Africa were the Sunday school lessons with all those white angels. And when they said God is love, God is kind, God is no respect of kith or kin, I kept wondering, why didn't he let at least one or two little brown or black angels sneak into heaven? So I began to suggest that somebody else had tampered with God's book in favor of somebody else, and that the Bible, to a great extent, was a rationale for European domination, but had been used as such. Then, coming to, after leaving Georgia, after a white man that I'd worked for, if he's alive today, he's a liberal with a capital L. His name was Gagsteiner. I asked him about some books on the African people in ancient history. And in the language of the South, he let me down slow. He spoke kindly. He said, John, I'm sorry that you came from a race that's made no history. But if you persevere, if you obey laws and study hard, you make history someday, and you personally might one day be a great Negro like Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was the one thing whites approved of at that time. All right, while doing chores at a local high school, holding the coat and the books of a recitalist, I opened a book called The New Negro, and I found an essay by a Puerto Rican of African descent, Arthur Schomburg. The essay was called The Negro Digs Up His Past. Now I knew I was not only older than slavery, I was older than my oppressor. And my oppressor was the last branch of the human race to enter that arena. Mock civilization. Don't get mad, get smart, prove me wrong. Now, in the old Harlem History Club, under Willis and Huggins, long since dead, John Jackson, died only a few years ago, we had to take up a collection to bury him. Charles Cypher, J. Rogers, under all of these teachers pointing me to good material, and Arthur Schomburg telling me, go study the history of your masters. Study the people who took you out of history. Then you'll understand your history. I started on an old chestnut, recently mentioned, H.G. Wells' Outline of History. It is still worth reading.
Sorry, I'll let it play. I got a point to make, but I'll let this play to the end.
Good basic outline. His basic facts are in order. When he tell you about the Crusades, he's not off one iota. But his interpretation is basically Eurocentric to the point of being a prejudiced document. Now, I was reading these kinds of books. I was reading Spingarn's Decline of the West when I was 18 years old. So I began to read European masterpieces, and I began to read European curiosity about Africa. Gerald Massey's 6th volume, Egypt, Light of the World, 2 volumes. Natural Genesis, 2 volumes. Book of the Beginning, 2 volumes. And I began to read Gerald Massey's attitude on religion and his idea that nearly European concepts of religion were stolen from outside of Europe. He was not an historian. He was not an Egyptologist. He was an agnostic, fighting the arrogance of the European of that day. See, the History Club led me to not only reading masterpieces by white radical writers who set the black radical writers in motion. A whole lot of claims black did not make until they saw the documents in works written by Europeans. And these works written by Europeans, what black had the time and the money to sit down and do a 6-volume work?
Well, Dr. Clarke, I would like you to hold it right there. Yes, thank you. Hold it right there. And sometimes you regret having to ask a question.
Okay. Let me show you something, just quickly. Now, 90%, 99% of what he said, I agree with. But, and I just want to make the point that what he said about the liberal friend of his who said, you know, if you persevere, you know, the black man has no history, but if you persevere, you can write your own history. So that man, well, I'm not sure of anything, I don't know him, but he meant well. But this is why this work is important. I've said this before, I think, but just in case I haven't, everybody has a history. Everybody has a history. The Chinese have their history too, of which they're very proud. The Japanese have their history. The Indian have their history. Asians in general have their history. Great history. The Mongol Empire, the Japanese samurais, the Indian Maharajas. Then you move across there, you got the Ming Dynasty. You got then you move from then, you go to the Slavic peoples, all the way to Western Europe, except for the African, except for the black diaspora. And that's a lie. It's a lie that's been deliberately perpetrated to keep what I believe is probably, for whatever reason, you can insert your own theories here now, to put down what I believe is the most feared group of people on planet Earth, the most feared race, let's say. Ultimately, we're all one race. But for some reason, the powers that be of recent history feared this part of the world / this type of man. The amount of effort, and this bears witness to itself. This is, you don't really have to, you dig deep. You don't have to dig that deep to come to this conclusion. The amount of effort that's been exerted to eradicate the global influence of black history, of blacks on the world and on world history, is unbelievable. Without History did a video not long ago, a couple of months back, in which and then you've also got the brother Kabuki, not a Kapruki. It's either Kapruki or Kapruski, so it's a name that I don't easily remember. They did a video, and Kapruki did a video in which he was talking about the Moors. And Without History did a video in which he was talking about the black nobility. And both videos in their own rights are very powerful and they're worth watching. But it showed how the influence of black Africans on Europe has been expunged from memory, so that when people show, and I used to be, again, I keep learning more and more. I used to be one of the folks who said, come on, there doesn't need to be, you don't need to blackwash Tudor history, and you don't need to blackwash European history. There weren't any blacks in Europe in the 1500s. This was a long time ago now, so pardon me for my ignorance, okay, guys? But like I've said before, I was part of the brainwashing. I was part of the brainwash, the complete mind mashery that the Western world has done on the whole world. Nothing could be further from the truth. Europeans were writing about, in their own words, in their own texts, in their own annals, and they were painting blacks that had a profound influence on their history. And over time, that's been expunged. You go and watch my video on the Moors. I've got a series on the Moors. I'll add to that in a few weeks. They're writing, they're documenting the effects of these blacks coming in from Northwest Africa, North Africa into Europe, and Northeast Africa into Europe. They're constantly writing about this. And today, we're told, no, we never step foot out of Africa, out of the below the Sahara, until Europeans came and picked us up and made us something. It's like everybody's allowed to have their own history apart from the African man. Everybody's allowed to have a glorious past. I mean, what are we talking about here? Empires is the history of raping and pillaging, right? That's what it is. So when I even say glorious past, I'm not bigging up raping and pillaging, but as far as you can say, that was an achievement, a civilizational achievement. Everyone's allowed to have one, apart from the black African man. Then it becomes a debate. Then when you're talking about something black, then it becomes, well, we're not really sure. This isn't by accident. This isn't a coincidence, something that just happens. It's something that is a deliberately instituted pattern. And so when that man was talking to in his account, in Dr. John Henrik Clarke's account, when he was talking about, if you persevere, you can make your own history because we don't really know. It's very likely that guy was under the same brainwashing, it perpetuates itself, the same ignorance. All right. And notice John Henrik Clarke doesn't go on to lambast him or anything. He just uses it as an anecdote. But one thing I'm gonna say is that I do disagree when he says that he couldn't find the black man in the Bible. Again, the Bible isn't a political book. It's not trying to make any political points. It's not trying to big up one history over another history. This is God's story and God's interaction with mankind. And I've said this before. So you're not going to get it. It's not going to be bigging up any one civilization. Okay? But I just want to take you to several. There's actual passages in the Bible where God's saying that the Egyptians are a black people. Short of literally saying Egypt is a black civilization and all of that pertains to it is black civilization, the Bible actually attests to that. I've got a video on that. You can browse through my channel, check it out. It came out last year. I've promoted this video to the nth degree. I really wish it had more views, but whatever. But I couldn't believe it when I was reading the Bible, and the Bible said that in Ezekiel, it claimed that the civilization that we know as Egypt didn't begin in the Levant, but it began in the Southlands, in Africa, within Africa. It said, I will return you Egyptians back to your land of origin, your land of your beginnings. And it used the word Pathros, which was it came from the Egyptian word for the Southlands. And we're talking Upper Egypt. That is completely diametrically opposed to what Egyptologists maintained for years and years and years. They maintained that the Egyptian civilization came from the Levant, from the Middle East, from the Near East. The Bible says, saying, no, the land of the origin of the Egyptian is deep within Africa, on the borders with Nubia. And that's what people are slowly coming to realize. There's also passages in the Bible. I want to show you this passage that talks about. I'll share my screen with you. It's in. It says this in Amos 9, verse 7. The prophet Amos is speaking, and he says, he's speaking God's words. And God says, are not you Israelites the same to me as the Cushites? So if you can look at where my cursor is, it says, are not you Israelites the same to me as the Cushites? Other translations say, are you not as dear to me, you Israelites? Are you not as dear to me as the Ethiopians or as the sons of Ethiopia? God's literally saying to the Israelite people, again, you can go into whether they're one and the same or not, because some people believe that Israel wasn't too different to Egypt and the black race. They did spend 400 years at least, as per the Bible story, in Egypt. So a lot of mixing would have gone on. Again, that's something I'm coming to realize myself as I do more research. They've downplayed the blackness of the Israelites as well. Okay. It just makes sense. There's no such thing as the Middle East. It's right next to Africa. So it makes sense that you would have not just cultural back and forth, but that a black Israelite wouldn't have been a black African-looking Israelite would not be out of place. Anyway, this is the Bible saying, are you not as dear to me as the Ethiopians? You match that up with several texts, several accounts of the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks talk about the blessed Ethiopians. There's another part in the Bible that talks about the Ethiopians who dwell at ease. No one can touch them, basically. Okay? There are parts of the Bible that talks about a tall race, a fine race, a mighty race of people. That's in Isaiah. Okay? And it's talking about the Ethiopians along with their cousins just across the Red Sea, the Yemenis, who once were a black African race and have been diluted over years as the lighter skinned Turks have taken over the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, you've got passage after passage that speaks to the Ethiopian. You got in the New Testament the first time the Christian message is taken outside of the Middle East, outside of the Middle East. It's going to Africa. It's by the Ethiopian eunuch, who is an Ethiopian minister who's like worshiping, who's taking a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and meets with the evangelist Philip. You got again and again Ethiopian, but we don't mean literally the country Ethiopia when we talk about Ethiopian ancient texts. We mean Africa, the mass of Black Africa. So you've got again and again this concept of Ethiopia being relevant throughout the Bible, strewn across the Bible. So when Dr. John Henrik Clarke says he couldn't find Africa in the Bible, he's doing the Bible a disservice there. He's doing the Bible a disservice. Thank you, Sir Frankton. Herodotus talks about the long-lived Ethiopians. Again and again. In fact, I believe it's Homer that talks about how the Greek gods, their favorite place of repose, their favorite place to go on vacation, if gods go on vacation, right, is Ethiopia. Zeus, along with the gods, they loved to go and dwell with the Ethiopians, for their land was hallowed or whatever. So the ancients disagree with how great and how influential and how esteemed the rest of the black world was, So anyway, I'm going off topic, but I just had to correct that because he says that, but that's not entirely true. A lot of people make claims about the Bible offhand without actually having read it and panned it. I haven't panned it myself, but I've read enough of it. Okay. Anyway, I'm gonna let the video play on. I just thought I'd make that point.
That is so obvious that it almost hurts. Okay, now let's get into the fray. We will have the scholars asking questions of each other. And I'd like to start with Professor Left.
Sorry, just to say this as well. Why would God in Amos say, "Are you not as dear to me as the Ethiopians?" If Ethiopia, if as the Africans, as the Cushites, as the sons of Cush and the sons of Ethiopia, why would the Bible say that? Why would God say that if we're not talking about a race of people, a group of people who were esteemed and known throughout the ancient world, and not slaves now, not for being good slaves or whatever, That's God speaking in Amos 9:7, saying that to the Israelites. You might interpret that as in a different way, and you say, well, I'm not going to go into that. That's a stretch. But anyway, that's what I'm going to say.
So it's asking a question of Professor Bernal.
Right, I'm just going to set up the sound again because the sound's gone down. Bear with me. I'm just going to fix the sound issue.
I'd like to ask Professor Bernal if he could point to some specific instances which he could cite where Egyptian thought influenced Greek philosophy directly, and if he could discuss some of those for us.
Well, the Greek philosophers were extremely respectful towards Egyptian philosophy, and particularly Plato in his later dialogues. The emphasis on geometry, which was the great strength of Egyptian mathematics and was the center of the Platonic educational system, I think is one example. I would also think that the system of ideas or forms which Parmenides and Plato pushed looks extremely Egyptian to me, but I can't prove it. I also think that the distinction between worlds of being and worlds of becoming, which fits Egyptian grammar extremely well and Egyptian cosmological notions extremely well, look very influential. I think that the Greek tradition, which was that Pythagoras and Plato had drawn from Egypt, seems altogether plausible. But what I insist, and here's our major methodological difference, is that I don't believe one can establish proof in these distant areas of history. One has to work on a system of probability, or what I call competitive plausibility. What is less unlikely than the other? Given the closeness of the two countries geographically, the contact that we know was taking place in the 6th and 5th century, when Greek philosophy began to be formed, the likelihood of contact is extremely high, and I think if anyone should have to prove anything, it should be those who would deny that there were significant Egyptian influences on Greek philosophy at this time, as the Greeks themselves associated the word philosophy with Egypt in their earliest references to it. It seems very strange that the people who maintain the Greeks' own tradition on this subject should be asked to prove their case rather than those who challenge it.
Well, I think those are some interesting ideas, and I would like to think very hard about them, but I think we must also think about the things that are very different and very, very confusing in the tradition, such as some of the things that are said about that Pythagoras learned in Egypt, he couldn't have learned there because they aren't Egyptian, particularly. There are some mistakes that are made in the Greek understanding of Egypt. And one problem is, in thinking about this contiguity, very few Greeks could get to Egypt over a long period of time, say from the 10th century to the 7th century. Then there was a window of opportunity, but then again the Persians moved in, kept the Greeks from getting there in any great number, and really until the conquest of Egypt by Alexander.
I hate to interrupt you, Professor Lefkowitz, but the idea here is to not just explain the question that you yourself have asked, but to follow through based on the response you got.
Well, I thought that's what I was doing, but...
All right, well then, actually we differ there. Professor Lefkowitz, would you like to ask a question? Professor Bernal, would you like to ask a question of Professor Lefkowitz?
Yes, as she and the predominant view of classicists at the moment concede that Egyptian art and architecture, and she's just written an article in the New Yorker showing a particular medical view was taken by the Greeks from Egypt. Why is it so implausible to suppose that the Greeks took other aspects of their culture, particularly in this period, I believe also much earlier as well? What is the reason for denying the possibility, which was brought up by the Greeks themselves, of transmission of mathematical and philosophical ideas at the same time?
There's no reason to deny it. It's just simply to try and find what these ideas were. Now, in the case of the medical thing that you mentioned, it happens to be a particularly wrong idea, and of course, wrong ideas can be transmitted as well as right ideas. And this is one thing that in tracing the history of the world, we tend to concentrate so much on the glorious achievements and the glories of Greece, or the glories of Egypt. There are also some non-glories, and some of the medical ideas were one of them. I think we're all very lucky not to have been living at that time. But I would say there's nothing implausible about it at all. And there is a great Greek interest in Egypt, as you say, and that surfaces very clearly in the later dialogues of Plato. But I think that if you're going to talk about stealing ideas from Egypt, which I know you are not, but others have, then you really have to show some parallel text and show what is done. I think the idea of some influence is something that could fruitfully be discussed and pursued, and I would like to continue to do that and to continue to encourage others to work on that.
You want to follow up on your question? You get to ask Professor Clarke a question.
Yeah. I hardly know where to begin. One thing I'm curious about, I had a quick look actually at the introduction to the second edition of Bradley's The Iceman Inheritance, a very interesting book with a lot of interesting hypotheses about the origins of cultures and civilizations. Professor Clarke wrote an introduction to the second edition to it, in which he stated that the first show of European literary intelligence surfaced around 1250 BCE with the publication of two books of folklore, the Odyssey and the Iliad. And that struck me as somewhat curious because, in fact, as far as most scholars seem to be able to tell, the Iliad and the Odyssey were composed actually orally and didn't reach a literary form, if you mean by that a written form, until probably the 6th century BCE in Athens. There are obviously texts from Mycenae and Crete and elsewhere with real Greek in a literary form from before 1250, in fact, going back probably to 1600 or so. But this has significant implications for the idea, which some scholars have put forth, that Egyptian language was deeply influential on the first form of Greek that we have, that is the Linear B tablets.
So I'm awaiting the question.
That is my question. Professor Clarke has stated that this is the first form of literary intelligence that surfaced around 1250, and in fact, it did not, and I'm curious how he is maintaining that.
All right.
It is the first book, and it's a book of folklore, and we really don't know whether Homer wrote it or whether Homer was man or woman. It's the first book to become known, basic to the West, in a form that we could study and conjecture about, and it emerged at the time Europe was beginning to show some intellectual maturity. And if you deal with this, you have to deal with what Professor Lefkowitz accused me of, not paying attention to historical chronology. And if she read any of my texts, any of my numerous guides and curriculars and lecture notes, you know that I'm a specialist on chronology. I know that one comes first and two comes second. But what I was trying to get across is that in the 8th century to the 12th century, so the intellectual emergence of Europe, at a time Egypt was in its 23rd dynasty and dying after nearly 10,000 years of some forms of organized society, Europe intellectually was just being born. And I further maintain that Europe in general had nothing to do with the creation of Rome and Greece, and yet the challenge of Rome and Greece created Europe because they were scattered tribes, and the challenge of Rome and Greece brought them together, and they became a people strong enough to create a state. If anybody got any information to the contrary, state the information to the contrary. I maintain that there was no Europe. You're giving Europe credit for things that happened before the first European war. A shoe or lived in a house that had a window. And I'm saying that you have not read, not just Massey, Joe Massey, his European disciple, Alvin Churchward, Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, the Origins of Religions, and his extensive work on Freemasonry. You've not read the American disciple of Massey, Alvin Boyd Kuhn, is who is this King of Glory, one of the best written books on the Christ story, when he proves that the basis of European spirituality was taken directly from Africa.
Professor Rogers, would you like to follow on your question?
I mean,
No one is actually maintaining that literary Greek culture pre-existed any number of Near Eastern cultures. Again, I find it a bit curious.
I don't accept Egypt as Near East. I accept Egypt as...
So, if you've just joined us and if you're maybe lost in this sort of word salad game that Guy Rogers is trying to play, I'll explain. He's trying to catch John Henrik Clarke, Dr. John Henrik Clarke, out. He's trying to play a gotcha moment here. What he's saying is that you have a situation where I don't know what he's quoting from, where Dr. Henrik Clarke has claimed that, Homer's Odyssey is the earliest form of literary work that we have from Europe, but he's been disingenuous there because John Henrik Clarke, first of all, doesn't really prove the wider thing being debated, which is where the Greeks influenced massively, fundamentally by the Egyptians, which they were, but this doesn't really prove anything, okay? But he wants to catch him in an error, and he's saying, look, you claim Homer's Odyssey was the earliest, but actually we have European works earlier than that. But that's easily cleared up by just saying, look, my point, and that's what Dr. John Henrik Clarke was saying, my point isn't that you couldn't find anywhere else that somebody had scratched something up somewhere. It's like this is the levels that we are dealing with now. Dr. John Henrik Clarke wasn't saying you can't find possibly anywhere else in the historical record where you've got a body of literary work in European civilization. But my point was Homer's Odyssey is the first proper body, a proper mature body of literary of an literary undertaking, and that's why it's quite often cited by classical historians, and it has the place that it does. I mean, if you read Homer's Odyssey, this might be blasphemous to some, but it's not actually a great work of. It's not some great. It's not Shakespeare. It's not. I shouldn't even say Shakespeare. It's not Chinua Achebe. It's not Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, you know. So it's not Shakespeare, but we quote it often, we cite it often. It's got the place it's got because in the minds of people, because it's one of the earliest. It's the earliest proper, complete body of text that shows Europe is kind of emerging as in itself is coming of age. You know, that was the point Dr. John Henrik Clarke was trying to make. Guy Rogers is trying to pretend like he doesn't know that. You said, and this is exactly what I keep going back to this guy. He's the gift that keeps on giving. Okay, this is what Metatron did in his response to Kweli Mika. He kept finding little, and his audience ate it up. He kept finding little. You had a man on camera literally pouring out olive oil to make his point that, you know, Egyptians weren't white, they weren't black Africans. He was pouring out olive oil on camera. I couldn't believe that video. I was stunned. He was saying, look, this is what we mean when we say olive complexion. We know what you mean when you say olive complexion. Please. Like, this is the levels of stupidity to which pedantry that these people go to, you know, to say they've got one over on you. That's exactly what this guy is doing here. Did you say that Homer was the first literal? It's like, come on, dude. So John Henrik Clarke puts that right, and he says, look, my point was, at the time you've got this body of work, this great tome coming out of Europe, Homer's Odyssey, Egypt was already on its decline. Egypt had already been there and done that. You know? Anyway, that's that. Let's carry on.
Part of Africa, created by the Africans from the South.
Even if I concede or admit or agree with you that Egypt is part of Africa, what I'm about to say.
There will be order. Thank you. There will be order.
Even if I concede that Egypt is part of Africa, what? So it's not.
Thank you very much.
Do I detect some disagreement? Yeah. My point was going to be that the most recent scholarship about the genesis of those two oral epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, points, in fact, in another direction to influence, and that is, in fact, the Hittite Empire, whose documents we can read very easily, and there may well be independent confirmation of the historicity of some form of a Trojan War in those documents. And so what I'm really asking is, why is it that we're just really looking in one direction when we're talking about the origins of Greek civilization?
Professor Clarke?
When Alexander entered Egypt, he wrote home to his mother and said that he at last reached the land where the Greek gods began, Apollo and Zeus. And he wanted to consult one of the great African teachers of oracles. And the oracle asked, how old is this man? He said, 32. They said, in 20 years, maybe he'll be wise enough to ask me a question that I care to answer.
Professor Clarke, would you like to ask Professor Rogers a question? All right, we are waiting. Professor Clarke,
Yes.
it is your turn to ask Professor Rogers a question.
My main concern is that they seem to have equated the civilizations of the Tigris and the Euphrates with the civilization of the Nile. What proof do you have that the civilization of the Tigris and the Euphrates predated the civilization of the Nile?
I don't think that I said that, and I don't think that anyone maintains that. I think the Hittite Empire obviously comes at a much later period.
I know very clear when the Hittite Empire came, I know what damage they did, because I maintain that every people who came into Africa, Greeks, everything from modern day English, everybody that came into Africa did Africa more harm than good. And that Africa owes nothing to outsiders in regard to development, because all of them declared war on African culture, war on African civilization, war on African ways of life. They began to bastardize Africa and confuse and create a kind of historical schizophrenia that the African had even gotten rid of to this very day. And they created whole words that did not previously exist, like Middle East. Middle from what?
And that there is the truth. So you've got, in an attempt to divorce Africa, this is what I was saying about African history, in an attempt to divorce major centers of human civilization and history from the black world, terms were created. I told you 2-3 lives back that I read from an academic article of how Australians and New Zealand whites were going up to serve in the First World War in places like Egypt, and they were complaining that they came to serve next to Arabs, and they're serving next to blacks. Where are all the light-skinned, one shade away from us Egyptians that we were led to believe are the native Egyptians? Where are they? And they kept saying, we're serving next to insert N-word. We're serving next to N-words here. They kept complaining about it. And the French authorities said, who had kind of protectorates over Egypt at the time, were saying, look, shut up. They're white Africans. They're just white. Just shut up. They're whites. And there are records of this. That's how, and I will go into this. There's much work to be done. It would be great if you could support the channel so that I can give this my full attention and pour in as much resources as I can into the channel. But there's much work to be done here. The whitewashing of Egypt is even much more recent than we've been led to believe. Okay? The erasure of the black influence and the black presence in Egypt is we're not talking something that stopped, in the Middle Ages or whatever. No. At the rise of the Ottoman Empire, no. We're talking about something that is still going on today, and that was massive exodus took place in the 20th century, in the early 20th century, of blacks in Egypt. So much so that you've got people coming out saying things like, there are blacks here. Why are there so many blacks? And the French can't do anything but to say, just ignore it. I mean, just ignore it. Just pretend like it's not there. But these were the black Egyptians that the New Zealanders and the Australians were serving right next to. And anyway, that's, I don't know how to, that needs to get across. I just want to get that across to people because it's a sorry state of affairs when I've talked too much. It's a story state of affairs, and I've lost my train of thought. But the point that what's his name, John Henrik Clarke was making. I've lost my train of thought. Gone on a little bit of a rant there. All right, apologies. Let's get back. Oh, I do have to mention a super chat just come in from Surfactant, urging the rest of us to support, and thank you so much. I'm really grateful to you for that, Surfactant. That's a $10 donation from Surfactant saying support. But there is a video that I'm intending on doing that is in the works, that I've kind of got the research done already for it. I just need to script stuff and put it out there and edit and whatnot. But this whitewashing of Egypt is much more recent than we've been led to believe, and it's a sadness, it's a tragedy, but it is what it is, and this is why it's important for us to do this work. That's the point I was making. I was making the point about the Middle East, and so John Henrik Clarke said, he says, middle from what? He goes on to say, you're talking about the Middle East. It's the play on language. It's the way they use language as well. They use everything in their arsenal to divorce and to extrapolate us from our history. The Middle East is unbelievable to me. We know of at least one group of people who, since time immemorial, have traversed the Sahara Desert. They flipping live in the Sahara Desert. They're called the Tuaregs. And for the largest part, they are black African people. Okay, they are black African people. They have been the link between the North, as far as someone keeps mentioning in my videos and in the live. I think someone's mentioned it today. How the Green Sahara theory, how important that is. Now, as far as the Sahara has been a thing on the African continent, past the period that the Sahara actually, that region dried up and became the desert, since it's dried up, we know that the Tuaregs have lived and have adapted to that region. They've been the bridge for many a people crossing the Sahara. They've been a bridge to inner Africa, from North Africa to south of Africa. Okay, but people still pretend like the Sahara was something that needed Arabs or whites to come along and cross, and in order to extract black slaves. We've been there. It's ridiculous. So, but it's part of how they use language and their theories to divorce Africans from African achievements on the African continent. So the Sahara is supposed to be this unpassable, unbreachable mass of land that, you know, you can't cross over, and the blacks couldn't cross over till whites and other peoples came over and brought trains or whatever it is they brought. But that's a lie. And that's the same point that John Henrik Clarke is making with the whole Middle East thing. You look at a map, and the Middle East is not middle anything. It's literally an extension of the African continent. It's an extension of the African continent. You don't say, it wouldn't be too far-fetched for somebody to say, you've got to look at the region that's called the Middle East and just call it East. What would you call it? Outer East Africa, or call that region East Africa as opposed to Northeast Africa, as opposed to calling Nubia and Sudan and Egypt Northeast Africa. You could look at the African continent and say, look, this is literally connected to Africa. There's a tiny strip of water that separates it, you know, but you look at the American continent. You don't come up with another name for South America altogether. You don't say the Middle South. Do you know? You say South American, there's North America, there's South America. But for some reason, and again, this goes back to my video on the Ge'ez and the Sabaean texts. I did a video last year about how the Sabaean text and the the Sabaean peoples at large were actually originally an African civilization. And instead of looking at the Sabaean empire, or the Sabaean civilization, as something that just came up of it on its own, it's actually an African, it's an extension of the numerous Ethiopic civilizations and empires that have come before. How do we know this? Some of the earliest texts we know of the Sabaean script, you find them on the other side, on the African, on the Ethiopia side of the map. Okay, so but for some reason, it's still believed that no, this text, this script originated outside of Africa, in isolation from Africans, in a place where that wasn't a center of anything. Ethiopia has long been, or the region that the ancients knew as Ethiopia, has long been the center of much of civilization. But all of a sudden, you got one of the oldest scripts in the world, and that's supposed to have just come out of nowhere on its own in the south of, in southern Arabia. Nonsense. Some of the earliest, some of the oldest, what's the word? Some of the oldest artifacts we have, images, sculptures of people. There's a very famous one of a Sabaean man. It's a bronze. It's tarnished bronze. It's greenish now. And some of the oldest images of these ancient people called the Sabaean, they're black people. You can see it clearly in the phenotype, in how they're in the build and everything. But somehow, again, you have to see that part of the world. You're told that's the Middle East. That's not Africa. It's nonsense. Anyway, back to the video.
Two, we will continue. Professor Clarke, you will ask the first question in round two of Professor Mary Lefkowitz.
Well, Professor Lefkowitz, at your own admission, you encountered J.A. Rogers 4 or 5 years ago. J.A. Rogers didn't say he was a historian. He was a searcher trying to find the role of the African personality in world history. He worked over 50 years of his life, gave his service, died broke. What gives you the audacity to think that you can dismiss Rogers out of hand? And what gave you the maturity to think that you can judge a writer like Sheikh Anta Diop, the finest historical writer we have produced in the 20th century?
Did you see Martin Bernal? The guy's on the same team as John Henrik Clarke. But if you noticed, he had his head in his hand like this. Oh my goodness. I'm strapped to a killer. This guy is he's taking no prisoners. He doesn't know what to do with himself, Martin Bernal.
I try to ask questions of all the material I read. I try to answer those questions on the basis of the evidence, the historical evidence, and all, in my view, comes down to that. And I do not wish to criticize any individual at all. I am dealing only with written work. The people who write that, I do not always know, and I have no individual or personal criticism of them. This is the way scholars, I'm sure, as you know, proceed, and that is simply what I did. In my book, I will leave it to everyone who reads the book to judge what I did.
All right. I think you have emphasized too much the word black, and we made the same mistake. Black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are. The proper name of a people must always relate to land, history, and culture. I did not say Cleopatra was black. I quoted someone else who inferred that. My defense of Cleopatra is not on her blackness, but on no matter whatever she was born in Africa. She was Her manipulation of Mark Antony and Caesar kept the worst aspect of Roman rule from the backs of Africa. I defend her as an African nationalist. And that's a good defense. And no matter what she did with her wares in and out of there, there's a whole lot of people got less for it.
Professor Lefkowitz, you may ask a question of Professor Clarke.
Professor Clarke, do you think that we should always judge history in terms of race?
Look,
You see that? You see that? This is another tactic. This is another tactic that is often used by the denigrators of black history and of black achievements and of black people. They're schizophrenic. In fact, it's tempting to say that they do it. It's tempting to say they do it accidentally without knowing, but I believe this was a very snake-like thing for this lady to have done, and it's something that a lot of them, a lot of people like her employ. I told you a couple of weeks ago in another live that I was on another person's channel, and I was he puts out content, just eclectic content about from the ancient world. He puts out various artifacts via community posts, and I believe the individual is probably most likely to be a Caucasian individual, and the person that owns the channel, that is. And he puts this stuff out constantly, and sometimes he'll touch on the ancient Egyptians. And he put out some content that had to do with the ancient Egyptians. Some ancient Egyptian reliefs were displayed on his community post, and I interjected and I made a comment on the post saying, what color are these Egyptians? They look pretty black to me. Again, more proof, something to the effect of, more proof of the blackness of the Egyptians. And he came back saying, well, I see them looking just like the Egyptians there today, brown and tanned people. Funny thing was that the post was actually titled, Egypt and Nubia, something to do with Egypt and Nubia. And the way the Nubians depicted themselves and the way the Egyptians depicted themselves with this deep, dark brown, full lips, broad noses, flat, broad noses, they were identical. These were identical depictions by the Nubian civilization and the Egyptian civilization. And I went on to make the point that, in response to him, hang on a minute, you're talking about tan. There's nothing tanned about these people. If white people were getting this amount of tan, they're dying. This is sunburn. That's what we're talking about, sunburn levels. This isn't the people and I've made this point myself again. If the Egyptians are depicting a tan, they must be the first and only people in history to be so obsessed with their tan that they're painting it on every time they depict themselves on these frescoes, on these walls. It doesn't make any sense that they're just painting their tan and depicting themselves as tan. They're depicting a tone that is only found, well, not only found, but is particularly found on the black African continent. That is intrinsic to black people. Okay? And I made that point in a very kind of semi-long post, and he came back with something stupid, and I said something like, "This is what these people do. This is what you people do," and he jumped on it. He couldn't. Now, in fact, sorry. He didn't. Sorry, I've got the story wrong. He didn't jump on that. He didn't reply to my well thought out, well reasoned critique of what he had said about, this is a tan. I cited to him sources from the ancient record. Cited to him genetic studies. He didn't respond. Complete silence, crickets. Until someone else responded to my comment. I can't remember what their comment was. Very inconsequential comment. And I guffawed at it. You know, I wrote back and I said something just dismissive. And then I said, this is what you people do. Something to the effect of that. Now, I actually, I was being cheeky. I was being very, very, very mischievous. Okay, but I did that, and you can believe this if you want. I did that deliberately because I thought, leave that there. It's an ambiguous phrase. These people. In actual fact, I was referring to the people who like to detract from our history, who tend to, sadly, if you're depicting this on a Venn diagram, they tend to come from a lighter skinned, ethnic background. We tend to. Okay, so I said these people. I said something to the effect of, this is what you people do, and that it was only then that the owner of this channel, I won't name him, it was only then that the owner of this channel came in after he ignored the well-reasoned critique I gave. He came in right then and he said, "Oh, I see you're one of those racists, are you? Talking about you people. Well, good, because now I know you for what you are. You're blocked." I couldn't wait to press the block button. He said, "You're blocked." And I thought, there you go. And I say that story to say that what Mary Lefkowitz does here is typical. It's very typical of this type of a person. They cannot wait, because they know what they are. They cannot wait to then use against you the race card. Because they know what they are. They know really what's at the heart of what they're doing. But they can't wait to say, "Well, you're being racist. Your worldview is racist. And, oh, isn't this an ironic state of affairs? Oh, look, how the race baiter is racist himself." I meant nothing of the kind. But I knew that he would jump on that. And he did. At the earliest, and that's what Mary Lefkowitz is doing here. She asks him a stupid question. She said, "Do you think history is always to be viewed in the lens of race?" But you're asking somebody here who's only here because you're asking Dr. John Henrik Clarke, somebody here who's only here in this debate, in this field, because you made this an issue. Your denialism of the blatant obvious historical facts. We can see the earliest Egyptologists said it themselves. They said it's undeniable. We cannot believe that what we are digging up is showing us Black Africa. It's showing us that the most revered of civilizations that we've written about, that we've idolized, it's showing us that we're looking at blacks here, Black Africans. Before they started then making up fake statues and doctoring the evidence with the Nefertiti bust, which everybody and their mama knows is a fake. That's before they started doing that. They wrote about that. They said that stuff. So you're talking to Dr. John Henrik Clarke, who's only here because he was barred from these institutions. Kweli Mika did a great video on the founder of the Black History Month movement. Go and check it out if you haven't. It's his latest video. It should have many more views than it currently has. Last I checked on it, it was like on 4,000, I think. But it should have many more views. And I knew of his story, but I just didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know how deep it went, and I'm ashamed of myself for not knowing that. But he really goes into detail as to how it came to be, how Black History Month came to be a thing. And he talks about how, I can't quite remember his name right now, but he talks about how the father of Black history, the Black History movement, the modern Black History Month. He talks about how he was barred from almost all history institutions. This guy was a Harvard graduate, and he had to fight hard to get his Harvard degree back in the 1800s. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history. And Kolimike does a breakdown of his life. This guy had to, and tooth and nail, just to get, just to teach history. So what does he do? He says, sack this. I'm going to make my life's effort about promoting Black history, about unsuppressing Black history. And that's the same kind of context from which Dr. John Henrik Clarke has come. And this woman has the audacity to say, must you always view history in the lens of race? Yeah, because this is what you created. This is what you created. This is like, I have to. I've got no history. No history. I've got no choice but to look at history through the lens of race, because that's what you did, and that's why I'm even here. But she thinks she's clever. She thinks she's showing John Henrik Clarke how obsessed he is with race. It's just a rubbish. It's just a nonsense. But I'll let you see how Dr. John Henrik Clarke handles that.
There was no such thing as race in the psyche of the world until the Europeans put it into the psyche of the world. The African knew nothing about race and didn't think they belonged to anything called a race. And when the Africans saw the Europeans, because they have a traditional hospitality to strangers, they didn't fight them, they didn't kill, they were curious about them. And when the African explorers, especially Mungo Park, went into Africa, nobody hurt him, nobody shot at him, nobody shot any arrows at him. The Europeans went in peacefully, but the Africans heard that Mungo Park was a pork eater. Most people don't know it, but Africans were not great pork eaters, and they're not great pork eaters today. Pork was a meat you ate in certain ceremonies, certain times a year. But we were not great pork eaters before we came to the United States or forced to the United States. But in the United States, we had to eat the part of the pigs that white folks threw away, so we made delicacies out of it and survived. I had this argument with Malcolm X. I said, if it wasn't for the black woman making delicacies out of pig feet, pig heels, guts, chitlins, you and I would be here arguing the point. I'm afraid that you're not only a delinquent in African history, you're delinquent in African folklore. So much of our history is tied up with our folklore, but Europe introduced words that didn't exist in anyone's vocabulary before. No one ever thought of anybody being inferior or superior. Intelligent people don't even a human being can't fall into that category. And nobody had the extensive problems the Europeans had with women, because in the period of feudalism in Europe that lasted over 1,000 years, the white woman in Europe was a vassal. But the African woman has never been a vassal in that sense. And we check out the culture, unity of Black Africa, dealing with the history of the matriarch. He got all the evidence right there that we were the first people to support a woman as head of state. We were the first people to support women as riding ahead of her army. We were the first people to make women a god.
I'd like to ask Dr. Bernal to ask of Dr. Rogers a question.
I agree. I haven't read Black Athene Revisited. I haven't yet received my copy. But I do know who the contributors are, and I have read the reviews they wrote, And these reviews, I'm told, are very similar to the ones that originally appeared. So the title Revisited is slightly misleading because these were immediate responses in the heat of polemic. Now, I have no doubt that the conclusions he summarized are the conclusions found in the book, but I'm not sure whether they're the result of an impartial selection, because having read most of the reviews, not all the reviews of my work, I find a pretty systematic selection for Black Athena Revisited from the hostile ones, and other ones which were more balanced or more friendly to me have been pretty, in fact, completely systematically not requested, or if requested, refused. And these include the 3 experts on Egyptian-Greek relations, not Egyptologists, not Hellenists, but specialists in the interrelations between the 2 cultures. And these 3 scholars' works were, in fact, excluded, and it seems, I wonder, if there's any other explanation for their exclusion than the fact that they would have appeared too friendly or to have taken my work too seriously. And serious is a word repeated in these reviews. Thank you.
I'm afraid I have some rather bad news for you, Professor Bernal. Professor Lefkowitz and I actually didn't read just some of the reviews of your work. We read them all. We collected them all. There's 50 pages of bibliography at the back of our book with asterisks next to the current outstanding reviews of your work from 1987 until just a few months ago. As for the selection process of the essays that went into it, I have to say to you that we, in fact, do believe that we have given a representative sample, and here's where the really bad news is. We actually excluded the ones that attacked you personally or attacked your competence for this field. As far as the 3 experts on Greek-Egyptian relations are concerned, 2 of them that you're referring to must be Eric Klein and Stanley Burstein. Eric Klein has written several articles about those relations. We, in fact, did ask him if he wanted to contribute, but he couldn't meet our deadline. When he eventually did, I'm afraid to tell you that his essay did not actually agree completely with your conclusions, but the reason why it wasn't in the collection was that it came in too late. As far as Professor Burstein is concerned, I'm afraid that his essay was much more critical than you seem to believe. So that really is the explanation, I think, for those omissions. I might say that as far as our editorial posture was concerned, we realized that these are sensitive, difficult issues, and we fully expected that we would be in this room here tonight. We didn't know the date, but we knew we'd be here. And so what we did, what we tried to do, was we tried to have what we call full disclosure. It's the reason why the book turned out to be not just another 150-page book with some essays sort of thrown together, but a book which attempts to give summaries of comprehensive accounts of the questions that Bernal raises. And we give Bernal full credit for raising those questions. I think that Professor Clarke and others are quite correct. Professor Bernal is not the first person to raise those questions, but in fact, he raised them in a compelling and interesting way, and we feel that we are giving him and those of you who are interested in these problems, as we are, complete respect, both by answering them in full and by being here tonight to defend our views.
I want to just, if I might...
Can I come back?
Yes, please do. I'm sorry.
I don't expect any scholar to agree with me entirely, and what I found with the reviews he said is that they did not agree with all I said, but they took what I said seriously, and they did agree with some significant things. I don't want total praise, and I'm sure they're right that the predominant reaction from the disciplines which I'm challenging is hostile. I don't question that for the moment. But the selection does include, I'm told, personal attacks on me as being a baby and various other things. So I don't think they've been quite so scrupulous as far as that is.
Again, the brilliant mind that is Guy Rogers thinks he's caught. He thinks he's he thinks he's Poirot or Sherlock Holmes or Perry Mason. It's like, and this is a courtroom. Actually, we have a body of work that actually was very, very hostile to you. Okay, sure.
I'm also intrigued because one person who had attended the meeting, the party given for the contributors to the book, which of course I was told nothing about, described it as a lynch mob. Another mutual friend of Mary's and mine refers to it regularly as the shit on Bernal book. And so I think there are very different perceptions of this book.
Yes, Professor. Is that a title that you come up with on the spot, or is it something you've been thinking about?
No, it's a title that a mutual friend of Mary's and mine uses regularly. He's a colleague at Cornell. It's not, I wouldn't have thought that up.
I think that if you look carefully, and I'm sorry that you haven't had an opportunity to work through the book carefully yet, I think when you do, you will see that there are not very many ad hominem attacks in it. Although I find your defensiveness about that somewhat curious, since in Black Athena, volumes 1 and 2, part of your methodology has involved actually contextualizing people and talking about their family relations, their own personal backgrounds. And so I'm a little bit puzzled by that kind of response.
I have no objection to people attacking me personally. What I would like to see is a all-round collection, and I think that as I live by the sword of the sociology of knowledge, I must be prepared to die by it. I think that people will see in 20 years where I'm coming from or what my personal problems or axes were. And I think that's part of the story of the book, but I think there's also the substance of the book. And I would have hoped to have found more, a wider scan, and we've had many collected volumes on this. I mean, don't think this is the first response to my work. There have been 4 journals now have had selections of articles on my responses and their responses to my responses, and there has been real dialogue. This was a book which I was not told about till long after it had begun, and when I was told about it and asked if I could see the pieces to write a response, I was told there was to be no response, and furthermore that the responses that I had published to the articles criticizing me were not to be included. This does not seem to me opening the debate, it seems to be stamping out heresy.
Excuse me. May I respond to that? May I respond to that briefly?
We will have a free-for-all in a minute.
Okay.
I wanted to follow up on a phrase that you said, and I didn't want to leave it unaddressed, the issue of full disclosure. And it is to that I'd like to ask a question of Professor Lefkowitz. Are you comfortable with the fact, you obviously were comfortable with the fact that your book, Not Out of Africa, subtitled How Afrocentrism Became an Excuse to Teach Myth as History, was underwritten by several foundations that have reportedly rightist leanings. I wondered whether this was a reflection of your own personal or ideological view, or whether you were just so cash-strapped that you took money from anyone.
No one tells me what to think, and no one tells me what to say except me, and the main financing of this book was out of my own pocket.
But surely you can appreciate the color of accepting funds from foundations that do not enjoy wide acclaim and receptivity. And I thought that maybe there was some concern on your part, in as much as you were interested in integrity, scholastic integrity and all, that you might have foregone the grants in the interest of academic and scholarly integrity.
If they had asked of me to do anything, I would not have accepted these grants. They did not do that. Therefore, the grants did not go to me. They went to Wellesley College, which had no objection to taking the money.
But still, the question.
This is something I said earlier. Earlier on, I said that it will come out that actually it would come out that Mary Lefkowitz isn't as unbiased as she claims to be, or completely disinterested as she claims to be, because she actually did receive money from very right-leaning organizations in the writing of her book, Not Out of Africa. But she made out at the very beginning like she was completely independent. Now, it matters. If you know anything about how academia works, funding for research and whatnot, you know that it matters. She passes things here. She nitpicks. Someone used the word nitpick earlier on in the chat. They nitpick a lot. This is the character that you're dealing with when it comes to our history and our place in the world. It's death by 1,000 little nitpicks. So, and the uninformed bystander, observer, would think, oh, okay, there's some fair points on either side. Well, maybe on their side more than the Afrocentric side. So therefore, I'll go with them. But she's nitpicking here. She actually admits, she goes on to admit that, yeah, okay, I did receive, but it wasn't me, it was the college that I worked for. But that doesn't make any sense. If you know how academia works, your college pushes you to get funding, to have your hand out for funding. Your college constantly pressures your academic institution that you're working under lives off grants and research money. From interested parties, lobby groups, the government, think tanks. So when she says I didn't get any money, but the college did, she's being very sneaky there. So okay, so there was money that changed hands then in the writing of this your book. And where did that money go? Oh, just my university. So did that university not give you what you're expecting us to believe, that you will see no residual benefits from that? Press 1 if you understand what I'm saying, chat. Press 1 if you understand. I want to see people press 1 in the chat if you can understand exactly what I'm saying there and the disingenuity of this person. You've got to pay attention to the people who are claiming. At first, their arguments might seem, especially if you're neutral, until you've been long in this game, you don't know what you're dealing with. And I'm not long in this game by any stretch of the imagination. I told you I had a friend. I had a friend of mine who came to this topic like me. I've not told this story, but he came to this topic disinterested, completely disinterested. And he, like me at the beginning, now he's not a black individual, he's a white individual. But he came disinterested, and he came to it from, I told him about Herodotus's quote, and I said, check out Herodotus's quote. Thank you for the interaction, chat. Thank you. I'm seeing the ones come through. Again, I need those ones. I want to know if what I'm saying is making sense to lots of people that I know are watching right now. Now, I said to this guy, check out Herodotus's quote. And he went and he checked it out, and he couldn't say anything against it. But he couldn't believe it. So he went and he found what other people were saying about it. So, you might see something and you think, oh, it can't be that simple. It can't be that obvious. If it's that obvious that Herodotus said they were black skin and woolly haired, of course, that only brings to mind one group of people, black folks. So he goes being a very skeptical person and thinking, how can it be so obvious in the historic body, in the body of historic literature, that this is what the Egyptians were described as, and yet we're still debating it. So he goes off and he tries to find out, and he does his due diligence, and he comes across Quora discussion boards. I'm sure lots of us know what Quora is here. And he comes across Quora, and in Quora, they've problematized it, as you will obviously know they do if you spend any length of time in this debate. And he comes across the obvious counter arguments. Herodotus wasn't saying black. The translation is dark skinned, and the dark they don't even touch on the woolly haired bit. Oh yeah, well some of them do. Some of the comments say it was dark skin. So I said to this fellow, I said, go out and check the amount of times that word is used and how it's translated normally. How is that term melanas translated normally, typically? Go back and check in the New Testament, in the Hebrew New Testament, every time that word is translated in the King James Version English, which we know in the English-speaking world as the standard, for Bible translation. How is that word translated? And it always, without a doubt, is translated black-skinned. Why all of a sudden is it now being translated by revisionists as dark-skinned? Something that began only in the last, 30, 40 decades? Why? And I asked my friend to question that and to think about it, and he started to see it. To the point where today, of his own volition, he's like, of course they were black. He's looked into all sides, and he's like, I can't even believe that this is still a debate. And he, being a white guy, is as angry as I am. As angry as I am that this is even a debate. So this is what they do. They pass things. They cast doubts on things that are plain as the nose on your face. Did you receive money? No, I didn't. Okay, but what do you mean you didn't? Because here's the records of this organization giving your college money for the book, and my college received money. Oh. It's ridiculous. We might have to do this in two parts. Let me know in the comments if you want me to finish this tonight, or you want me to do this a part 2 tomorrow night, or tomorrow evening, or some other time this week. Let me know. Just let me know in the chat, please. 1 for finish this tonight, this evening, and 2 for let's do this another time. Let's finish this another time. Because we're about to go into the second half, which is just back and forth questions from the audience, I think.
Mace, you have a duty, do you not? Inasmuch as you are preparing work, the aim of which is to overturn the revisionism, you say, that is going on in black studies, particularly in African studies. This whole battle that you have been dealing with in terms of Afrocentricity, do you not, regardless of where Wellesley chose to accept money from, do you not, as a scholar, have an obligation to discern where this money is coming from, to see whether the source is compatible with your own views as a scholar?
I did not see anything in the conditions of the grant that inhibited what I did and what I meant to do or say or think. I believe that I acted with perfect integrity. Now, you may disagree with that, and you may disagree with the aims of those foundations and other foundations, and that is what we do in a free country. Until they are outlawed, I don't see what else can be done.
Well, let me ask you the question perhaps more directly. Had there been, say, a foundation to wipe out scholarship of any sort, if such a foundation were to have given money to Wellesley College, would you have found it equally acceptable to take money from such a foundation to further your work?
I don't know what foundation you're talking about. This seems to be a...
It was a hypothetical question.
It's totally hypothetical. I don't know what you're trying to force me to say or to compel me into what corner you're tending to put me. If you want to, go ahead and attack me, too.
I'm not forcing you to say anything, Professor Lefkowitz. I'm just trying to elicit a cogent response from you.
Well, you be the judge of my response.
Okay, in this last round, before we get to questions, and we will get to questions, but let me warn you, you ought to have questions. that are questions, not lectures, and that are straight to the point. In this round, it will be a free-for-all in which all of the discussants are permitted to ask questions of each other and to chime in responses whether they are asked the question directly or not.
Will we have time to sum up afterwards?
Yes, you certainly will.
You see, I think we should.
Okay, we're about to go into the second part of the debate, which is actually more interesting than the first. As hard as that is to believe, the second part is more interesting than it is the first. Now, I think we've done a bit of a marathon tonight, so I will schedule part 2 of this for later this week. I'll have to check out schedule and everything and just make space for it. But I think we've had quite a good showing this evening. Thank you again for the super chat, Surfactant. Straight in there, a real one. Thank you very much for that. Very much appreciated. Whatever contributions people make to the channel is always welcome and always very much appreciated. So we will and I thank the rest of you guys who have made this worthwhile, interactive. And I love your comments coming through and all your points coming through as well, your salient points. Now, I think we will have to do a part 2 of this, and we'll be doing that maybe tomorrow, maybe I'm seeing Surfactant say Wednesday or Thursday would be great. So I'll have a look at that and see if that fits well with my schedule. But yeah, I think it's worth doing. Going into the second half and seeing what the people had to say about what they had seen. So anyway, thank you again, guys, for joining me in this chat, in this live, and look out for part 2 and look out for a video coming out later on this week on the channel. And yeah, we're good to go. All right, guys, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I've got nothing else to say but thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure. Okay, we know where we left off. Cool. All right. Bye, everybody. This is Mr. Joe Black saying, keep repping black right. Kush to Compton, no doubt. Thank you, guys. Peace.